anyone planning on flying soon, there's undoubtedly anxiety in the air from a shocking missile attack on a civilian airliner. FAA imposed flight bans, and another plane disappearing from radar. Air travel has suddenly become more complicated. Planes carrying more bodies of victims of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 arrived today in the Netherlands, 1 week after the plane was shot down over the Ukraine, allegedly by pro-Russian separatists. Airspace over Ukraine remains closed. Meanwhile, the FAA has lifted its ban on U.S. flights to Tel Aviv. However, individual airlines have yet to decide if and when to resume flights. Tel Aviv's airport was closed earlier this week after several Hamas rockets landed nearby. And earlier today, an Algerian airline says it lost radar contact with one of its flights this morning. The plane was en route from Burkina Faso in West Africa to Algiers when it apparently crashed in eastern Mali. At least 116 people were on board. For an inside view of how this is affecting commercial air travel, I'm joined by airline pilot Patrick Smith, who also writes the Ask the Pilot blog. Welcome. So, thank you. Patrick, I haven't spoken to you since the accident, a weekend accident, tragedy, the shooting down of the Malaysian jetliner. When you first heard this, and it was another Malaysia jetliner, unlike Flight 370, which disappeared sometime in March, did you think this can't be a coincidence? Did you think that there had to be related in some way? No. My first reaction was poor Malaysia Airlines to have such a horrendous spate of bad luck. I mean, to lose 2 wide-body planes in less than a year is, fairly unprecedented. Honestly, I don't think either of these incidents is the airline's fault. No. But that doesn't necessarily matter so far as scaring away traffic and maybe ultimately bringing the whole airline down. So these surface-to-air missiles had been taking out smaller craft, military craft. Even as early, the night before, I think, a small craft went down. Why was a commercial jetliner, did they think they were immune? Were they too high? They're at 33,000 feet. They thought, oh, well, nothing's going to touch us here. Why would they have done that? Well, that's a great question. It's easy to go and say Malaysia Airlines screwed up. They shouldn't have been there in the first place. But they were operating in airspace that was, for lack of a better term, legal, open. They were one of many carriers flying through there. Lufthansa, other big European and Asian airlines were using this airspace. I think, ultimately, airlines and crews and passengers have to trust the entities whose job it is to decide if certain airspace is safe or unsafe. It's not the carrier's responsibility. It's the job of organizations like ICAO and the local governments and the agencies that oversee the airspace in these countries. If they say that it's safe, then we're expected to believe that. Now, in retrospect, maybe that airspace should not have been open in the first place, but that really wasn't the carrier's call. And meanwhile, there's the danger of extrapolating, because we're hearing now how all around the world every day, thousands of planes fly over restive areas, unstable parts of the world. That's absolutely true. But that doesn't mean that every one of these regions is a major disaster waiting to happen. That's simply not the case. You have to look at each area independently and subjectively and go from there. So was Israel overly cautious by that argument in shutting down Tel Aviv airport? Well, I think to some extent what happened with the situation in Israel was maybe a bit of a knee-jerk reaction based on the Ukraine incident. Nobody wants to be perceived, rightly or wrongly, as putting their aircraft in harm's way, so there may have been an overabundance of caution. There may be political motivations behind it, not so much for the U.S., but maybe other countries who curtailed their flights, trying to make a statement of some kind. I don't know, it's hard to say. And meanwhile, now we have this accident yesterday in Mali, and there was one in Taiwan. Have they found the wreckage yet? I'm not sure. But what's happening now is people are trying to tie these accidents together. And I don't think that's a good thing to do. You've got news people do that. Right. You've got very different accidents. To scare people. Well, you have different situations, different parts of the world. And meanwhile, what's lost in all of this is the fact that flying right now, despite this spate of bad luck, is, in the big picture, is safer than it's ever been. I mean, last year was the safest year in the entire history of commercial aviation.
And because we tend to fixate on these accidents when they happen, we lose that sense of perspective. Go back, for example, to the year 1985 sometime. There were 27 major air crashes in that one year that killed almost 2,500 people. That's how it used to be. Air crashes.
Are there as many small plane crashes as there used to be, or is that about steady?
I'm not sure, big, small. You know, we have so many different variations of airline now. You've got major carrier, regional carrier, and so on. It kind of depends how you look at it. But on the whole, like I just said, flying is safer now than it's ever been. We don't see these large-scale catastrophes, most recent one notwithstanding, with nearly the frequency that we used to.
So just on the business of the airlines now, we're now seeing these upticked TSA fees. So it used to be that you paid a fee for the flight. When you booked it, you got a little fee. But now it's every leg of the flight, and sometimes it's by the price of the ticket, and it's crazy.
Yeah, so much of what people pay to fly goes towards taxes and fees, sometimes close to half the price of the ticket.
And what's the justification? Because they need more of those people making you take your shoes off? I mean...
Well, that's the security part of it. I mean, there are many different fees, everything from fuel to customs and immigration fees. The security part of it is something we could talk about at great length at another time.
I mean, all of this stuff, trickery is what it is. I mean, I went to book a flight on JetBlue today, and I hadn't experienced this, but so everybody can laugh at me if you want, but most of the aircraft was blocked out as special seating. So it was just
extra leg room.
But it was more than 2/3 of the aircraft. So the regular seats were booked. And so you had no choice but to click on one of these for an extra $100 per leg.
Understood.
$100? I mean, 25, maybe 100. So it was like buying a seat on top of buying a seat.
Yeah, I mean, that's frustrating. But, you know, lost in that conversation is the fact that airfares today are about 50% of what they were 30 years ago on average. Flying costs half as much as it used to. And that's after you factor in all of these ancillary fees that passengers hate and airlines love.
And all that stuff.
Baggage, food, onboard amenities, whatever. But importantly, those things were never free. You know, they were always there as part of the price of your ticket, and that price used to be a lot higher.
Really?
I think that's lost on a lot of people, younger people especially, who don't remember when only a certain fraction of the population could afford to fly at all.
Yeah, but the popular flights, like going to New York, going to Washington, D.C., those are exponentially greater. I mean, just profound. I mean, it costs me 3 times what it's to go to Washington, D.C. than it is to go to L.A.
Well, markets vary. It's supply and demand. It's not necessarily how far away a given city is. It's just who wants to go there and how much they're willing to pay.
Yeah. All right. Patrick Smith, always a pleasure to have you here.
Anytime. Thank you.